I've been fortunate enough to be able to test out quite a lot of cameras during my YouTube endeavors for a variety of reasons. And honestly, I'm even surprised that I haven't got this far, like just being able to get in contact and just be able to use all this equipment over time. Something that I think it's pretty cool. However, I'm still always drawn towards older devices, and my stance on that has not changed for a very long time. Even when it comes to cameras, as cameras tend to age pretty well. And this particular camera that I will be talking about happens to not only be a pretty awesome filming camera, but it also happens to be really good for live streaming. And I'm very surprised with how underrated this camera is when it comes to live streaming. And it actually comes from Sony, which is one of the most popular brands when it comes to actual cameras for live streaming. So this camera here is going to be the Sony RX100 Mark III. Let's dive in. And the exterior is going to consist of a metal build for the majority of it, and this is going to be a very small point-and-shoot camera with some heft to it, and it does feel pretty solid in hand. And it's super easy to carry around, and aesthetically, it looks really clean. However, once you've unleashed all of its parts, it starts to look pretty complex and pretty professional for that matter. So, the design of this camera almost remains identical to even the one of the Sony RX100 Mark VII, which is Sony's latest iteration so far. So this design has not aged at all in my opinion. On the top, there's a knob for switching between the different shooting modes, a power button, a shutter button with a switch for zooming, a pop-out flash, and an electronic viewfinder. On the back, there is the record button, one function button, which is customizable, a menu button, a customizable ring with a directional pad, a playback button, and finally a dedicated custom button. On the right, there is a micro USB port and a micro HDMI port. Now, this camera features a flip-out screen with very limited touch functionality, and it's pretty much only touch to focus and the like. Now, this display is actually pretty big, just considering, and it's pretty comfortable to monitor things from it because of its quality and size overall. However, you do always have that electronic viewfinder, which also works really well. Pulling it out will turn on your camera, and then pushing it back down and putting it away will just turn it off all at the same time, and I'm a little bit puzzled as to why that is the case, but it does do that if you were wondering. Either way, I really like the viewfinder, and it's especially useful when it's just too bright outside, because it lets me know that I can shoot under pretty much all sorts of circumstances, no matter how bright it is outside. So that viewfinder is incredibly helpful. And of course, in typical Sony fashion, their menus and overall interface are organized, but they have a lot of windows and tabs to shift through in order to find their different things. These menus shift too, depending on your shooting mode, so sometimes it's a little bit iffy to keep up, but once you get used to it, it's not really all that big of a deal, and well, you'll get used to it the same as I have. This camera has a 25-2mm lens, but it is more of an equivalent to a 35mm lens. That 25 is really more of a 35mm equivalent, so as you can see, this is not going to be a super wide lens, but it does get the job done for most of my needs. And I don't really have a ton of complaints there, and it does shoot at 1080p at a maximum of 60 frames per second, which is also really nice because it gives you some flexibility there in regards to getting high quality slow motion footage, which is pretty cool. Footage here is always going to be pretty sharp in typical Sony fashion as well. As a vlogging camera, it is honestly pretty nice, but I wouldn't use it without other equipment, because while the autofocus is pretty okay, I mean, it's gotten a lot better for the newer models for sure. It doesn't have a microphone port though, so you're just going to be dependent on the subpar audio coming from the internal mics on this camera. So I would just get an external audio recorder for vlogging if you want to use this camera in particular. And as you can see now, I'm doing a bit more of an indoor test, but this is mostly just going to be for the microphone. The microphone's not going to be great, obviously, since it is going to be built in. I mean, it's okay, but if you're going to be outdoors, I strongly recommend that you add something else to it. And performance and just shooting videos is also still going to be pretty nice, as 1080p video is still pretty sharp, even when shooting with the viewfinder, mind you, and at 24 frames per second, you can still get pretty cinematic videos overall. I'm not very good at managing performance when it comes to just like shooting all types of videos. Even then, 1080p are still going to look quite sharp and pretty nice overall. It is still going to be a really cool experience. Even shooting with the viewfinder, mind you, and at 24 frames per second, you can still get pretty cinematic footage overall. And now granted, I'm not exactly too good at getting at that type of content as much as I try. However, in this mode, you can still squeeze so much out of this camera, and I really love it for just like taking videos and that sort of thing. Even though I don't use it all that often, considering that I do tend to shoot all of my videos in 4K. If you were just looking for a 1080p camera overall, then honestly, this is a really fantastic one for that. Exactly, like just considering how sharp, how many options, and just how customizable this camera is overall. And in terms of accessories too, you've got a huge myriad, considering that Sony makes the best point and shoots out on the market. At the very least, most of us seem to agree on that regard. But the main reason why I got this camera in the first place is for streaming on Twitch, because it does give me a clean HDMI feed, which means that it'll display what's on screen without needing to show any of the status stuff on it, and it has a flip out screen, so I can always see how the image looked at a glance, and I don't really have to worry about it too much. And it's been a great camera for that, since I just have so much control over it, over Streamlabs OBS, over the settings, and well, the image just looks so very crisp, even online. I have it connected to my Elgato HD60S capture card and through a dummy battery so that it always stays turned on no matter what. Honestly, I'm incredibly happy with it when it comes to streaming and filming and all sorts of its usability aspects. This is a really cool camera. Another great thing here is also going to be in its battery life, which is going to be pretty solid, and especially filming with it outside for a long period of time, ends up lasting me a good while. I've never actually killed it. Yeah, but I don't use it like consecutively, for example, for like shooting for an entire hour at a time, considering that it does have a recording limit, and that is something worth keeping into consideration. I believe that the recording limit is only at 30 minutes at 1080p, which is something worth keeping into consideration, and that is actually going to lead me straight into my complaints. As nothing in life is perfect, though there are some things to keep into consideration before going ahead and buying this camera. For one, this is a 1080p camera only, so don't expect any kind of 4K. This isn't a complaint, as it is an older camera. I'm just letting you know that it will not shoot in 4K. If you're looking for a 4K variant of this camera, then I would suggest that you go for, at the very least, the RX 100 Mark IV, even though on that end, you won't be getting clean HDMI, apparently. An issue I do have with this camera, though, is that the viewfinder turns on and off your camera for no apparent reason, and that's just kind of annoying. And this camera also touch control, which is pretty disappointing and a missed opportunity, and that unfortunately is still going to carry over to Sony's most expensive cameras, which is a true bummer if I'm completely honest. You're also lacking a microphone port, which means that it's not perfect for vlogging, as cool as it actually would be if it had that, or at the very least if it had better onboard audio. However, as a streaming camera, I have zero complaints. I am so incredibly happy with this camera when it comes to streaming. And so, in conclusion, this little guy is going to be an amazing little camera that is capable of doing a lot of things so right. You can find this camera usually for around $300 or sometimes less, and sometimes just a little bit more. However, you can get so much out of it. I can strongly recommend it if you're a streamer who wants an affordable upgrade to your visuals, and I can also recommend it to those who really good quality footage at 1080p, whether it's at 24 frames per second or at 60 frames per second at a budget. Since this camera honestly will fulfill the majority of your needs, and it certainly does incredibly well for me. So with that said, highly recommend it. The Sony RX 100 Mark III is an amazing beast for such a low price, and I'm really in love with a lot of these older cameras, as all of them are just so damn impressive nowadays, and so much more affordable than the newer competition. So yeah, highly recommended. And if you're interested in purchasing this camera, then I will be making sure to leave affiliate links to Amazon down in the description. If you end up using any of my links and make a purchase, then I do get a small commission that does help me run things just a little bit more smoothly around here, so if you were to use those, I would appreciate that quite a bit. Also, if you like me enough, then do make sure to follow me on Twitch, where I like to do my weekend streams, and I usually stream at MMOs like Final Fantasy XIV and a couple of other RPGs along the way. And if you like listening to just really smooth jazz music, it's supposed to be just being able to just like take it easy and just play some games. So with that said, if that is something that interests you, then do make sure to stop by, especially if you would like to see the RX 100 Mark III in action with its intended purpose. And do make sure to follow me also on both Instagram and on Twitter if you would like to stay up to date with any of the Tech Summit endeavors. So with that said, this has been Francisco from Tech Summit. Thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you all later. Enjoy!